Now, I wanted to talk about the 10 to 25 on the GH5 as I did some test shots, and we're going to go through those in a second here. But I think this is a valuable comparison to another fantastic lens, the Sigma 18 to 35. If you have a micro four thirds system, you probably already know of the Sigma 18 to 35 with the Metabone speed booster. It's kind of this perfect combination. I've said as much as well in the past, but I wanted to compare the two. So let's take a look. If we take a look, here is the 10 to 25. Big lens for sure, but thankfully it's not as heavy as you might expect based on the size. It is actually lighter than the Sigma 18 to 35, which is here, they're side by side. So if we take a look at these side by side, on the left you have the 10 to 25, on the right you have the 18 to 35 with the Metabone speed booster, both on a GH5, and you can see size wise they're relatively the same. However, the Sigma 18 to 35 is an APS-C lens, Super 35 lens, so it is covering more sensor area, which is why using with the Metabones makes so much sense. And in general, these two lenses, when you do the math in terms of crop factors, they end up equating to roughly the same focal range. With the 10 to 25 full frame equivalent, you're looking at something like a 20 to 50, and on the Sigma 18 to 35, you're looking at something that's more like a 27 to 52. So technically, the 10 to 25 does give you a lot wider field of view at the wide end, and then on the kind of more medium to telephoto end, that 50 millimeter end, you're roughly about the same. But if you have a situation where you really want APS-C lenses or Super 35 lenses, then the Sigma is the obvious way to go because it's not necessarily a micro four third lens, where the 10 to 25 definitely is. But side by side, more or less the same size. However, 10 to 25 is lighter. Now, as we move on, I want to show you some of these samples. So this is with the 10 to 25, and I wanted to pull this up specifically because this is basically the closest you can focus compared to the Sigma, which is that's about as close as you can focus. So when you consider the 10 to 25 is wider in terms of field of view, and you can focus this much closer compared to between the two, so that's the 10 to 25, and then here is the 18 to 35. To me, that's a big advantage, just having more of that macro functionality, being able to get closer, get things in focus at that really wide field of view, I think is really nice in terms of an option and a feature. Another comparison here, we've got the 10 to 25, and I'll zoom in here and you can kind of see an example of some sharpness going on. So very, very sharp lens. If we view and we go to our data, we can see that this was shot at 1.7. Pretty shallow, not as shallow as 1.7 would be on a full frame camera, but it's definitely shallow compared to what we've got here, which is the 18 to 35, and we can zoom in and do the same kind of feature. It's still sharp, it's still impressive, but it's not quite as sharp. It doesn't have that same crispy cleanliness that the 10 to 25 has, but it does hold its own. It's not awful by any means. If we take a look over at the cost of each of these things, you'll see that they are in different categories in terms of price. The 10 to 25 is an $1,800 lens, brand new, compared to the Sigma 18 to 35, which is, a little under $700. So for over double the price, that's really for the context we're talking about. This isn't just like, oh, these lenses that are the same price, like they're not the same price. This is much more expensive, and I will say in this setup, you would have to consider getting some kind of speed booster, which some of them are more expensive than others. So you could always take a look and see which one makes the most sense for you if you are doing something like that. But Sigma 18 to 35, 600, 700 bucks, plus another, $200 or $600, depending on which way you go. You're getting maybe close to $1,000 all said and done. Whereas the 10 to 25, you're almost at $2,000. When you factor in tax and shipping, if that's a factor. So not not apples to apples. We're kind of comparing apples to oranges here a little bit, but hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on the Sigma 18 to 35 and how well it performs compared to something that is much more expensive, but also maybe why you would want to go the more expensive route if you are a Micro Four Thirds shooter. Let's get back to some images. So we looked at these again, just to kind of reiterate that close focus I think is a really helpful feature to have, as well as just that field of view, having that 10 millimeters on Micro Four Thirds being kind of that 20 millimeter, which I think is a really nice look for full frame compared to the 18 to 35, which is not quite there. Again, you're looking at more like a 27 millimeter lens in terms of the full frame equivalent. So not as wide, not as versatile in certain situations. If you're vlogging or you want those really wide shots, it's just nice to have. So we can look here at some more samples. These aren't all that interesting. They're more or less kind of the same in this setup, but you'll see some differences here in a minute. So this is that 10 to 25, the Leica lens, and you can see the sharpness there on what's in focus versus the 18 to 35, which in this situation, they're relatively the same. The Leica is sharper, but only slightly. Here's a picture I took of my son, and this is with the Leica 10 to 25. And if we zoom in here, you can really see all that beautiful, crisp detail on, eyelashes. And this is, again, at a 1.8. So wide open, essentially. It is a 1.7, but I shot at 1.8. Like, that's really sharp. And I think that's spectacular detail for this lens and for Micro Four Thirds, which is something we will talk about in a second as to why some of these lenses, like why it might be a good idea to spend a little bit more on a decent lens. So here we have, you can see this was taken with the Leica 10 to 25. If we zoom in, do a similar kind of thing, you can see the resolution here. And I shot this at basically that 25 millimeter focal length. So kind of that 50 millimeter full frame equivalent. So that's kind of the imagery you're getting. You're not getting those like long telephotos that are a little bit nicer for portraits, but you're getting something that's mid-range and not awkward and super wide. So we can see the resolution and the detail here on the eye, because obviously that's what we want in focus. And it looks really nice. Lots of resolution, lots of detail here. Now we'll do another, basically the same shot, same settings, just with the Sigma 18 to 35 with the speed booster. And if we zoom in and do a similar comparison, you can see the detail. Not quite there, not quite as sharp, a little bit blurrier, but also half the price in terms of the lens. So why I wanted to show this was because the 10 to 25 is definitely sharper and resolving more detail. And that's something to keep in mind. Just because a camera is 18 megapixels or 20 megapixels or 45 megapixels, the lens you use on it is almost always more important than the megapixels. The megapixels can give you, more ability to zoom in and to crop and to reframe and not lose resolution in the process. But the lens itself is what's going to give you the resolution in the first place, which is why if you're really worried about it, the Sigma 18 to 35 in this scenario just isn't giving you that resolving power that the Leica is. Hopefully you can see that and it works in the side-by-side comparison. Now, for illustration purposes, here's another. This is my other son, and we can zoom in, and this is the Sigma here. You can see all shot at a 1.8 at 25 millimeter focal length. And if we zoom in, you can see the eyelashes are sharp. It's getting some detail there. It's looking good. This is by no means bad. I mean, we're zoomed in quite a bit. If you look at just like the main shot, first of all, let's do that. If we look at the main shot kind of side by side, there's no meaningful difference there. If this was going to Instagram or you were going to even print it out as a small, picture frame and put it on, your wall or something, there's no meaningful difference there. So if cost is a factor, you can get away with the Sigma 18 to 35, no question, which is why it's so great. The Sigma 18 to 35 is a fantastic lens and people love it because it's so good. But when we zoom in here and we compare the Sigma, which is what this is, and we compare that to the Leica 10 to 25, you just see so much more detail, so much sharper, So much better performance too, because you're not running it through a speed booster. That's the other benefit. It's native. So the fact that this fits right on a Micro Four Thirds, it's a native lens, communicates directly with the camera. It's not going through any kind of adapter or communication that way. You just get a lot better performance out of it. So not only is it resolving more detail and is sharper, but it's just easier to use as well. And if we consider the fact that they're about the same size, although the 10 to 25 is lighter, the only reason not to get it is the price, which I think is, something that's not a concern, right? If you only have budget for, the Sigma and, you're barely getting by with the Metabones, like it's a great combination. Don't get me wrong. It's not bad by any means, but in terms of pure performance and flexibility, in terms of getting the widest field of view, not the widest, you could shoot with something like the 7 to 14, or you can get wider Micro Four Thirds lenses, but just having that wide end, the kind of 20 millimeter full frame equivalent in a nice zoom that's super sharp, and you can zoom in to basically a 50 millimeter, equivalent. To me, that is awesome and spectacular and much better than the new Lumix, 20 to 60 that they have, that has the variable aperture that changes as you zoom in. It's not the fastest lens. It's granted it's full frame and it is different and it's a lot cheaper. But when I saw the deal on that I got this lens for, because I bought it used, but only lightly used, and it was I didn't pay full price for it, so I got it cheaper. That's the thing. Look for deals. Look for people selling this, used, slightly used. See if you can find a good deal on it, because it's a beautiful, fantastic lens. And hopefully you can see, side by side, they're basically the same. And I've been shooting with the 18 to 35 forever, very comfortable with that lens. But now seeing just how much better the Leica one is, it's just staggering. And again, to reiterate, it's really important to have good lenses. They feel really expensive, but if it's worth it, like that's going to give you the resolving detail and the actual resolution. The camera could be 50 megapixels. And if you don't have a good lens on it, it does not matter, because the details just aren't there. So the lens is paramount. It's one of the most important things. So I do think in many times, specifically in this case, when you're looking at just the flexibility and the versatility of a lens like this, I think it does make a lot of sense, especially compared to the 18 to 35, which is very, very popular. Very, very popular. And a lot of people love that lens. I don't see as many people talking about the Leica 10 to 25, probably just because it is insanely expensive for what it is. But I think it's kind of worth it when you're comparing the two kind of side by side and you're looking at the advantages. You can focus closer. It's going to give you a wider field of view. It's going to give you sharper images. It's a native mount, so it just works better than something that's adapted with Metabones. So I think overall, it feels really nice to use. It's very well built. It's big, but it's not all that heavy. It feels actually really good on the GH5. So there's plenty of other people who've talked about this lens. You can check out their reviews if it's something you haven't seen before. Maybe if you've seen it before, maybe this just is kind of a reiteration to go give us a second look. It's kind of weird to be buying a lens for a GH5, because the GH5 is, getting kind of old, but this would be the perfect lens for something like a GH6 if and when that does finally come out. I'm invested in Micro Four Thirds, and I think it's a powerful system. It has some incredible lenses when you take a look at it and take advantage of like what the system can do compared to some others. But full frame has been catching up. There's a lot of full frame cameras out there that do basically everything the GH5 did. Granted, it did it 3 or 4 years ago, but we'll see. If the GH6 comes around and has some killer features too, I'm definitely not going to be sad with having the Leica 10 to 25, because it's a beautiful lens, and I'm really, really pleased with it so far. Hopefully, the images kind of speak for themselves, and you can kind of see that differences between the Sigma 18 to 35 and the Leica 10 to 25, and see if in your mind, like, if it makes the difference in terms of cost. I think it does. I think the first thing that's even capturing the light, that the first thing that sees the image is the lens, and you want to have really good lenses to take full advantage of the camera and what the camera can do. So if you haven't seen it before, or you haven't considered it, maybe give it another look, check it out, and see if it makes sense for you.